are you intending that these modules that you're creating be created by some kind of a learning module business, or are you intending this operating system to be utilized by teachers to create modules appropriate to their particular group of learners? And if that's the case, where do they go about getting all the pieces to put the puzzle together?
Okay, let's talk about that. Yeah, I mean, first, it's all of the above. Okay, I mean, we hope that this becomes the postscript for learning, that it does become an industrial standard in terms of the way that professionals engage in the creation of multimedia learning courseware, if you will, that they get this standard and they evolve it that way. But the real hope is working with companies like Intellimation, which perhaps Al could brief you on later, people that redistribute educationally generated educational materials to educators, that the long run, the creators of all of the content that populate all the different references and representations are the students. That what we do is we start off with and this is a vision and dream yet to necessarily be made practical. The technology and how it gets fed is there's a number of ways to accomplish it. But my hope is that we provide the central thread. Somebody starts a central thread, which is really nothing more than taking an existing text or an existing course and chopping it into the modular design that we've articulated, building it up with a first level of reference support and putting it out there. And that teachers or instructional designers then go, two things happen. That as the learners bump into that material, whatever it is that they need that didn't get supported flows back to the system, so that from a content design, curriculum design point of view, we start to learn, well, geez, out of the 3,000 learners that have gone through this course, there's an awful lot of coincidence around meaning needs about that point there. We need to get more dimension there. We need to have more representations there. We need to have more references that expand on that. That's what's critical. We can see it, right? The other approach, that's the way that the system feeds back to the mutual learning dynamic through the curriculum design. The other approach is that the learners themselves are tasked when they're first given the materials, they're first given the course materials, that we'd like, class, for you to do research into the human drama of this subject. This particular scientific discovery doesn't exist in a vacuum. There was all of the gut-wrenching life that Newton had that was part of it. So let's research Newton, make that a different representation that will now accompany this. So it becomes constructionist-like and objective for their learning. Their learning creates the content that folds back in to become a different representation along that same space. So we hope that it does both.
Dave, let me add to that if I can. I think that the print-based publishers are coming to the same conclusion. A good friend of mine at Apple, Sue Ann Amron, who runs the multimedia lab, or did run the multimedia lab, the research lab at Apple, is leaving Apple to become the vice president of Simon & Schuster for electronic media. And her challenge at Simon & Schuster, who is the world's biggest textbook publisher, owns Prentice Hall and a number of other textbook publishers, is to take all of the resources of Simon & Schuster, who incidentally in turn is owned by Paramount Communications. So you have all of the imagery that Paramount owns. They also own a couple of cable TV stations, and they own this giant publishing network. And her job is to take all of this content now and transfer that in some meaningful way for learning to electronic media. So she has this enormous palette to choose from, which has full motion video, which has print-based material, which has over 10,000 titles that have been published. And so she doesn't have this encumbrance of intellectual property rights because Simon & Schuster, Paramount, or Prentice Hall own the intellectual property rights. So you're going to see, I think, very rapidly, and it's not just Simon & Schuster, it's Time Warner Communications, and it's Columbia Pictures. they are all coming to the table with this same kind of motivation. So my belief is that in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see a real blurring between print-based materials and what we now think of as electronic media. They're going to come together in new and different ways that I think we haven't even imagined yet.
Okay, what I'd like to do, frankly, I'm a little concerned we haven't been very interactive. Haven't been as interactive as I'd hoped for. So what I'd like to do is kind of finish up the one more piece that may be critical to understanding what we're doing technologically, which has to do with the architecture of the database itself, how we molecularize information, so that perhaps you've understood, even though briefly, the basic learning paradigm we're trying to pursue, the authoring tool system we've tried to evolve, the learner interface, so that you can look at it as if first thing we're doing is trying to evolve a new relationship, and that towards that end we've developed tools to create materials and learn from materials in a way that helps the creators of materials to manifest this relationship. That's what this is all about. And that the next piece to understanding it, hopefully is a simple one, we won't take too much time on it, has to do with how we make processing this kind of a relationship economically efficient. Because we are not interested in developing a relationship that implies a $4,000 machine in front of everybody. We're interested in developing a relationship that can become pervasive, meaning that it can just become the way, like an appliance, that we relate to information when relating to information is intended to facilitate our learning. My hope isn't to stretch the envelope of what a Macintosh can do, but to make what everybody's television sets and Nintendo sets do have the qualities that we've been describing. And that while we need the power of a Macintosh to run a very sophisticated movie or simulation, we don't need the power of a Macintosh at all to have the basic relationship we've been describing. Any Nintendo machine could do it. The problems are how we structure the data, the way that the database is functioned. How is it that we constrain the choices that the machine has to make in order to process things? And the paradigm that we want to use is that whereas the computer has evolved to be what we call a random access processor, because what somebody's doing with a word processor or a database or a spreadsheet program is virtually unknowable to the machine, it's not predictable, that when we're talking about learners, that what we're proposing is that at any given time, the learner's in the center of what we might call a relevancy bubble, a bubble of material that's relevant to supporting the meaning needs that might occur given where they are being inside of a learning objective, itself nested within a larger subject or field of learning materials. Now, in a traditional system, there's two different technologies that have evolved in the traditional systems. One is the spaghetti-like linkage that's kind of common in HyperCard or in other hypermedia systems, where this button or this word is a button and it's connected through a discrete link to this thing and stack so-and-so. The other approach is, well, we're just going to have all of the encyclopedias and dictionaries and reference support sitting on CD-ROMs on servers, and every time the learner needs something, we'll try to figure out what it is they want, we'll let them articulate what it is they want, we'll send that out to some kind of a dynamic search engine, which will then go and pull all of the lists of hundreds of thousands of entries on all of these different reference libraries, find which match apparently exists, and then flag back to the learner that we have possibly these choices, after which they make them. It causes the system to go back and grab whatever it is and bring it back. Now, what we say is that all that is enormously inefficient, that the learner's need for reference or representational support, given what we've described, is much more knowable than that. So we've designed a system